Now, the Jesus Seminar claims that the New Testament documents are not historical biographies of Jesus, but only theological reflections about him. But Dr. Habermas explains that other historical writings also contain theological ideas, but they aren't disqualified as reporting historical information. Why not? I'd like you to listen.
One problem with the thesis that the New Testament writers were theologians and therefore don't present history is that historians of that time, Greco-Roman historians, tell us we don't have any accounts of history like that. We don't know accounts where people are just plain hardcore historians. The fact is, if you study Tacitus, if you look at Suetonius, if you look at Pliny, if you look at others, these Roman historians are famous for mixing omens and even miracle accounts and other stories into their history. Tacitus is known to be biased in favor of the Roman aristocracy. Suetonius can't talk without bringing in omens and the Caesars who saw their demise, and so they acted this way or that way. Now, what do historians say about them? They say, well, that's different. These guys are historians, and they don't mean to talk theology, but the theology is there. I'm saying in principle, just because the New Testament has things to say about theology, that has nothing to say about whether they can report history or not. There's a great amount of data in the New Testament, and I think that's recognized by the vast majority of scholars today.
Now, the Jesus Seminar claims that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they really their Gospels. Further, the seminars concluded that only about 18% of the words ascribed to Jesus in the Gospels were actually spoken by him. Well, what about this? Dr. Habermas explains that, number one, the traditional authors like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John can be defended. Number two, the critical scholars today have conceded that parts of the Gospels are historically true. And number three, if you take that evidence that they concede, you can easily defend traditional Christian beliefs about Jesus. Listen.
Let me make three comments about the authorship of the Gospels. The first is, I think the traditional authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, can be defended with a good deal of force. But in contemporary apologetics, R.T. France says, for example, that even if we don't take the time to sit down and work through each of the traditional authors, you can still support the authenticity of the Gospels on this ground, the same one we do for Roman history. These are still the earliest stories, extended stories about Jesus. And as such, they are due the respect of being the earliest historical pieces of data we have. But let me go after the third way. You've got traditional authors, you've got, if people don't like that, you've got the earliest books that depict the whole life of Christ. But third, I favor a type of apologetic that builds from the ground up, that doesn't say all these books are historical and therefore anything in them is true. I would take snippets of information. Now today, as I tell my students over and over again, with critics, Paul is in, the Gospels are out. Well, for the Christian, Paul and the Gospels are Scripture. But if they're going to give us Paul, why don't we take Paul and build a case? And I would favor taking a few facts and building up the data around them and show that we can make our case based on these few facts alone. There is a body of Pauline literature that can be accepted as historical by virtually everyone. Let me give you an example or two. G.A. Wells, the British professor of German, who's written a number of books arguing that Jesus probably never lived. G.A. Wells will still grant 8 authentic Pauline letters. Now, that doesn't satisfy the Christian who would like 13, but let's, instead of being upset with him for what he doesn't give us, let's take what he does give us. Those 8 include our most important doctrinal works, namely Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, and Philippians. He gives you all those. And so since Paul is a given, even for somebody like G.A. Wells, who argues Jesus probably never existed, let's use Paul. And when we're talking about the resurrection of Jesus, for an example, or the nature of the gospel, let's look at 1 Corinthians 15. Let's look at Galatians chapter 1, passages that are unanimously given. And that is precisely why the New Testament still gives us our best data, because even looking at it as an irreducible minimum, or the lowest common denominator, we have plenty of data here to talk about Jesus of history.